then we'll be live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking Landscape Photography for tonight. It's absolutely fantastic to have you with us. And also really fantastic to have Martin Hawes join us tonight as well. Someone's got something going on in the background, unfortunately. Who's that? Oh, it was me. All good. So I might pass it over to Nick just to do a bit of an intro.
Yeah, g'day everyone. Good to have you on the show. And tonight's a special show. I am here to introduce Martin Hawes to you. Martin is a wilderness photographer, but he has a background in working with parks, with track management, track monitoring, and things like that over many, many years. Martin first came to Australia when he was 12 from England, and he soon completed a degree in mathematics at the Australian National University, I think. And following that, he decided to get into wilderness photography and pretty much went full-time from the start. One of the things that Martin did very early on in his wilderness photography career was publish a book, which I'm particularly fond of, and it's something that we'll probably talk about during the show, called Above Me, Only Sky.
Yeah, that's it there.
And Luke's showing it. Just talk, Luke, while you show that.
Yeah, this is what it looks like. So there you go.
And I thought I'd bring it up early because it really is, in my opinion, the best wilderness, Tasmanian wilderness story, I guess, when it comes, or collection of stories that I've come across, and it really is a fantastic read of Martin's adventures in the remote southwest of Tasmania in particular. And
the thing that strikes me too, Nick, just sorry to interrupt, is that there's that breadth of stories, but I was just discussing this with Martin, hope he doesn't mind me mentioning it, but he put it out the same year I was born. So the amount of work that he'd already done, even at that young age, is impressive in its own right. So it just makes you wonder if there's that much there from that point, how since the years gone on, he must definitely know a lot about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's the 40th anniversary of the book this year, which also dates Luke to being 40. Can you guys still hear me all right?
Yeah, clear as a bell, Luke.
Yep, that's all right. I lost Luke for a bit, so he's gone off somewhere. But it's a fantastic read and a fantastic set of pictures. But the stories are really what brings it all together for me. And Martin has such a gift of telling stories. And if you're lucky enough to be friends with him on Facebook, you get to read those stories when he comes back from the most incredible adventures into the Tasmanian wilderness, just that bigger belief, to be honest. And the stories that he writes about those are just brilliant. Oh, looks like we've lost Luke, and the recording has stopped. A
live streaming's still going, I assume, so that's good.
Okay, we'll just see what's happening. Right, okay. I'm not sure what's happening there, but can I start recording? It's made Martin the host.
Yeah, I just started recording on my computer as a backup, so
cool.
we'll just keep rolling.
Excellent. I'm sorry about that, folks. We love our technical issues here, and that's just another one. Yes, so we're very lucky to have Martin on tonight. Martin has published numerous scientific papers on the Tasmanian wilderness and on wilderness in general, talking about its its definition, along with a lot of these papers he's written with Grant Dixon, who we've had on the show before, of course, and Martin and Grant have been working together and walking together for many, many years. And Chris Bell has also contributed on some of those studies. And a book that came out just 2 or 3 years ago that Martin and Grant and Chris published is here on the screen. You won't see it very well because of my background, unfortunately, but it's refining the definition of wilderness, safeguarding experiential and ecological values of remote natural land. And it's a fantastic document, and a very important document that will help guide governments here in Australia and elsewhere into what actually is a definition of wilderness and why it's important. And that's something that Martin will talk to us tonight about, and I'm very much looking forward to it, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing his pictures and hearing some of his quite amazing stories. So, Martin, that was a long introduction and a bit of a technical.
I was going to add my bit if I can.
Oh, right, okay. Well, yes, Paul, please.
So less formal, I think. But Martin's one of those sort of mysterious, legendary figures in Tasmanian lore for me. I've heard his name bashed around, and I occasionally see these photographs and these stories from places that pretty much no one on earth is probably ever going to get to or ever be committed enough to struggle through to reach. And there's a few people like Grant Dixon that have the capacity to do it, but and I think that's maybe why Martin and Grant are such good friends and do these adventures together. But it's kind of hard to describe someone in a way that if you haven't sort of committed to that level of wilderness experience where you're literally, going to some of the most inaccessible and remote places in this part of the world that can literally take weeks to get back to and from, that aren't on the map, that don't have tracks, that require massive commitment. And not only that, but the more I've learned about Martin over the years is his advocacy and commitment to wilderness, and the capacity he's had to help organizations and groups and governments around the world to understand what it is, and to help define it, and to help translate it into something a bit more understandable for those that will not do what Martin does. And I've been a wilderness guide for 20 years, and I will not do what Martin does and has done in my lifetime. It's just beyond me, I think, in a lot of ways, or what I'm willing to put up with. You'll get that a bit from the stories, hopefully.
I'd actually like to read a passage out of a couple of paragraphs out of Above Me Only Sky, just to illustrate what we're talking about. And I hope you don't mind me indulging in this, Martin, but it's just a couple of paragraphs, and it's talking about your adventure along the World River. And it's just before it's as you set off. Okay, here we are. In Martin's own words: romantic curiosity eventually got the better of me, and one morning in January 1979, I set off down the old Port Davey track east of Mount Bowes, hoping to reach the Weld on foot and then raft it to the Huon. My load of nearly 45 kilograms included a small inflatable raft, collapsible paddle and life jacket, and 2 large plastic barrels containing my camera gear, sleeping bag and 2 weeks' food. The track, though overgrown in places, was not hard to follow, and after climbing Mount Bowes, I left the track at the creek on the southeastern side of the mountain and plunged off into the scrub towards the Weld. Ahead of me lay some of the most arduous walking I've ever done. By following the creek, I avoided most of the bora, but paid in price in hour after hour of almost solid horizontal scrub, not to mention having to climb down several waterfalls with that monstrous pack on my back. After 5 hours of exhausting work that afternoon, the Weld River was still nowhere in sight, and on the following morning, the going seemed to get even worse. It was not so much the weight of my pack as the 15-kilogram plastic barrel strapped on top that gave me the most trouble in the endless jungle of woody stems. At times, I was forced to crawl on my knees or even my stomach to get under logs and branches, or make detours high up the side of canyons wherever the creek was impossible to follow. Finally, after another 5 hours, the scrub opened out somewhat, and I at last came to the world, peaceful, clear, and completely unnavigable. I had blundered. And we'll leave it there.
It's all coming back to me now. Happy memory.
Martin's stories all have that element there, and it really does paint a picture of what the Tasmanian wilderness, particularly the southwest wilderness, is truly like when you leave road and when you leave track. So, Martin, thank you for joining us, and I guess we better let you do some of your own talking now.
Well, yes. Well, there's a funny story of following that passage, which I didn't include in the book, is that I think sometime on that trip I was sitting on a log beside the river, and my pack shifted slightly. Normally, if your pack shifts, you kind of shift it back. But with 45 kilograms, if your pack shifts, you go with it. I fell over, and this pack dragged me down, upside down into the scrub, and my legs flailing in the air. It's kind of symptomatic of the imbalance between me and the load I was carrying.
Yeah, that would have been difficult to get up, and it sort of reminds me of maybe seeing a ladybug that's gone onto its back and is flailing around to try and get back up. I've been stuck in scrub myself, but not to that sort of degree. But it's not a nice feeling when you realise that you're going to have to do some extreme gymnastics to get yourself back upright. That's for sure.
I just think of some of the people I know that really they're into lightweight hiking, and the thoughts of barrels and things like that from back in the day must be, seemed like worlds ago in that sort of sense. You probably have a slighter, maybe a little lighter pack now, Martin.
Absolutely, I can barely imagine carrying the kind of packs I used to carry. I mean, I fairly regularly carried 2/3 of my body weight, and now I carry about half of that, and it still feels quite heavy. Certainly modern equipment has made a huge difference. And about 20, when I was young, I used to think, well, this will toughen me up for my old age. And I don't quite know whether that's true or not, but I'm still doing it, so maybe it was. But about 20 years ago, I thought, I've got to start getting serious about getting the weight down, because I never really thought too much about it before. And I systematically started getting the weight down, food and gear, and it has made a huge difference.
Yeah, fantastic. Maybe we should go back to sort of the start. And you, as I said in the intro, you came to Australia when you were 12. Maybe you can describe how you got into this into wilderness and all that sort of thing, and what made you fall in love with it. It's such an alien sort of landscape from where you've come from to where you ended up.
Well, look, can I indulge myself and go back even further?
Sure.
To my very early childhood, because this kind of just thought came to me fairly recently. I must have been about 3 or 4 perhaps, and somebody put this book in front of me which had line drawings on it. But every second page was a page of tracing paper, and this person took a pencil and drew the pencil around one of these drawings. And then they lifted up the tracing paper, and the drawing was on the tracing paper. And I was absolutely fascinated. And then the book was taken away. So I never got a chance to experiment. And possibly that frustration has been with me ever since. But the thing was, what fascinated me was the miracle of image making, the magic. There was a kind of magic to my 3-year-old or 4-year-old mind. I saw this magic. And I mean, it actually is something rather magical, making an image. And we could wax very philosophical on that. Perhaps we can go into it a bit later on. But so that's story number 1 anyway. And story number 2 is when I was about 5, maybe, or 6. I was physical education was never my thing, but I was in the gym at the school I was at, and I remember walking along this parallel beam thing, or this low beam. And the reason I was doing that was because I was convinced that one day I was going to go to far-flung places and be a missionary, and I would need these skills for crossing logs in jungle. Where this stuff comes from is anybody's guess, but some part of me must have foreseen my eventual trip to Tasmania and my evangelizing about wilderness. But anyway, to come to your question, so I came out at the age of 12. Up to that point, I'd done a little bit of walking in the English countryside, and that was pretty much it. And so coming to Tasmania in itself, at that age, coming to Tasmania was a tremendous adventure. And I mean, the world wasn't as small a place then. You know, there's still a sense of going a long, long way away, even though there was, you know, a great deal of similarity between Australian culture and English culture. It was still a huge leap. And within a year, I discovered in inverted commas, the Tasmanian wilderness, and it blew my mind. Basically, very, very quickly found myself in a completely different world, absolutely fascinating. The most amazing adventures started to unfold before me, and I never looked back.
And you arrived at a time when the conservation movement was just starting to emerge, because you arrived as the announcement for Lake Pedder to be flooded was happening. Do you remember much about that time?
I remember a great deal, because I actually heard about Pedder even before I left England, which is kind of remarkable in a way. But I remember because we weren't particularly a conservation-minded family by any means, just sort of run-of-the-mill suburban middle-class family in England. But I mean, my parents had decided to come to Tasmania. And I remember my father sort of telling my brother and me, almost as a kind of warning, like, don't, you know, it's not going to be perfect there. You know, there are problems. And the problem he cited was Lake Pedder. You know, he had actually heard about Lake Pedder. God only knows how. But, you know, it's interesting. The news of Pedder had reached England in 1968. You know, it reached suburban England in 1968. And I think he may have even shown us a picture of Pedder and said, look, you know, there's hydroelectric development, kind of as an example of you look, fellas, you know, there's some environmental damage going on there, which you're going to have to live with. So I came out and my first ever trip into the southwest was to Lake Pedder, the Lake Pedder. I mean, you can't get much more of a direct entry into that. And so I mean, that is very much my story. My wilderness story is very much has a shadow side. And that from the day even before I stepped in Tasmania, the destruction of wilderness was the shadow side of everything that I was coming into contact with. So I mean, I fell in love with wilderness, and always there was this sense, I suppose, of dread and destruction and grief and horror at what was being done to the wilderness. And Pedder exemplified that to the nth degree. I mean, I'll say we could talk all night about Pedder, because I mean, I was not old enough to appreciate what Pedder was. I personally feel that I don't think any of us really understand what Pedder was now. Probably the only people who really do are the people who spent a lot of time there at the original Lake Pedder. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Pedder was the spiritual heart of Tasmania. You know, it's Tasmania's Uluru. An extraordinary place, you know, extraordinarily unique, extraordinarily powerful. And it, you know, kind of was like the epicenter of all the power of the wilderness. And what was done to Pedder was you know, an ecological crime of you know, untold scale. And what is so often forgotten, and it was even overlooked mostly at the time, was that Pedder wasn't the whole story. That while Pedder was being destroyed, the whole Middle Gordon was being destroyed, and all its tributaries were being destroyed, and hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of pure pines were being destroyed, and the view fields of all the major ranges in the southwest, which hitherto had been deep wilderness, were being destroyed or debased by this impoundment, two impoundments. all of that and more was happening. So, and I mean, to be honest, I'm actually in a way grateful that I came late to the party, because if I think I'd been old enough to spend a lot of time at Pedder, would have broken my heart. And it did break the hearts of many people, and some people were broken by Pedder. I'll say no more than that, but I mean, I say that without reservation. Some people were broken by what happened to Pedder, and I can fully understand it. And in a way, I was sheltered from that because I didn't have the chance to really connect with that place. But if you connected with Pedder, I mean, it would just be, the most extraordinary thing in your life. And for people like Dracanis, it undoubtedly was.
So what influenced you to start getting into photography? A new country and no doubt a new school and new friends. What was your journey from there?
Well, when I first came to Tasmania, I didn't think the bush was accessible, because I'd been sort of kind of warned again by my father that there was kind of creepy crawlies and snakes and things, and you didn't go there. So that Tasmania was about sailing and stuff like that. So for a little while here, I sort of tried to get myself interested in sailing, but failed dismally, because I never had the slightest interest. And I went on one overnight trip with the school in 1969, and it was just around the back of Mount Wellington, Kanani, and suffered every minute of it, and came back swearing never to go bush again. And of course, a few weeks later, thought, geez, that was fantastic, wasn't it? As you do. And then I think if I remember rightly, my brother and I did pretty much the same trip a little bit later in the year. And come that summer, we did a 2-night, 3-day trip to Mount Field in perfect weather. By that stage, we were pretty much already both well and truly hooked. I mean, it doesn't take much. But I mean, I guess there's no way of really answering your question. I mean, another person could have done the same thing and lost interest. Something deeply appealed to me about it, and something started reeling me in. And it's hard to say exactly what, because it developed very much over time. Initially, I think adventure, for a kid of 13, 14, it was an amazing adventure. You went out there, and I mean, all of the normal constraints of society were thrown away, and the main constraints were just survival and getting up the hill or whatever it was, and putting your tent up. Very, very basic, sort of primitive demands on your initiative.
Yeah.
But at some stage, I started to fall in love in a much more kind of profound way with what wilderness was. I can't say exactly when that happened. I think it was a very gradual process. As for photography, well, I mean, when I show you my photographs, I'll probably explain that a bit more. But initially, I was just taking happy snaps. But I guess, again, it's easy to speculate in retrospect. But I think possibly at some level, I began to realize, you see, what happened fairly early on is that in wilderness, I was confronted with something I didn't understand. And I still am. I feel that wilderness has a dimension which Western culture doesn't have the conceptual framework to make sense of. That is what confronted me, and long before I could even have said what I just said. I mean, I didn't have the words to express it or articulate it. But I think that fairly early on, I started to realize that through photography, I could articulate it in a way, that there's something about visual art and photography that enables one to express and capture and convey this extraordinary quality that wilderness has, which certainly at that time I didn't have the words for. So wilderness began to become photography began to become a passion for me as well.
Mm. So you did a degree in mathematics, but you're only very young when you decided that wilderness photography was what you wanted to do as a career. I think you said in the book that you decided to do that in 1978, which must have made you the ripe old age of 22. Were your parents a bit disappointed in the fact that you did your mathematical degree and then went off and did art instead?
Yes, yeah. I don't think my parents ever came to terms with the choices I made in life because they were just too far off the scale of what they saw as being safe or sane choices to make.
They're probably not completely alone there, Mum.
But yeah, I mean, I loved mathematics. Well, I mean, I actually went to uni thinking I'd do physics, and I got the track switched me onto mathematics mainly because the physics department was appalling and the maths department was brilliant. But I did enjoy maths, and I found it fascinating. And I still do. But I wasn't, although I was good at it, I wasn't brilliant at it, and I found the pressure of university increasingly unpleasant. And counterproductive, to be honest with you. I mean, it's increasingly counterproductive to any enjoyment I had of mathematics, and certainly to any sense of discovery or exploration. It was just high pressure absorption of a vast amount of material, and it was getting less and less pleasant. And meanwhile, when I could, I was coming back to Tasmania. I was at ANU, as you mentioned, and I was coming back to Tasmania and going into the wilderness in what spare time I had. And it was like commuting between planets. And I was also becoming increasingly disenchanted with the academic world. I think basically because something in me wanted a life. I didn't, I felt there's got to be more to life than this. And I couldn't reconcile this extraordinary world of wilderness with extraordinary world of mathematics. And when I was in my third year of university, everything sort of started to come apart in many ways. And it was really what was actually coming apart was my commitment to going on an academic path. And but I also began to realize that I could actually my choices in life were much greater than what I had believed, and that I could do practically anything I wanted to, or at least have a try. And so I sort of remember thinking, well, on the one hand, I've got this sort of adventurous streak, and on the other hand, I love sort of maths and science. Well, where do these two things coincide? Well, I know I'll be an astronaut. So I actually wrote a letter to NASA, and they replied very politely and said, well, get yourself a career in the Australian military. And that didn't really appeal to me. And so the plan B was to become a wilderness photographer. So in a very erratic way, that's the path I took. And after I left university, I took a year off to kind of hedge my bets. And as I say, glibly, I'm still taking a year off. But that first year I kind of dithered, and I didn't really know what I was doing with myself. And it wasn't until 78 I actually started to kind of get a sense of direction and really apply myself to wilderness photography.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe get into your photographic journey and have a look at what you prepared tonight and the stories that go along with them.
Let's see if we can do this properly this time. Okay, so now how does that look? Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Well, this was my first ever trip into the Southwest. And I mean, goodness me, it laid it on. Now this, we're talking about Pedder. This was January long weekend, maybe February. No, so I think February long weekend, 1970. Still 2 years before it was flooded. 1,000 people went to Lake Pedder that weekend. It was a long weekend.
1,000.
And I was on a party of about 60 people, which went down in 2 bus loads. It was a Hobart walking club trip. But even with that number of people, you can see the length of the dunes there. When you were there, you wouldn't have known there was more than a few dozen people there. And I don't remember much about the trip. It was very hot. The weather was like this the whole time. And the morning of the second day, there was mist on the lake. So we walked along this vast, huge area of brilliant quartzite sand and clearing mist. As the Franklin Range is coming out of the mist. I mean, how can you not be touched by that experience? And me being me, I sort of latched onto this guy, Tony Moskell, who became, he's a real character, and he was about 20, 30 years older than me. but he was a seasoned walker, and he sort of became my mentor, and he took me under his wing a bit, and so he and I went off together that day. And being Tony, he thought, let's go and climb one of these peaks up here. I think we're heading for Session Peak, and went up some crazy route and didn't actually get there, but we got high up the range and had this magnificent view. So,
Martin, do you mind? There's a lot of people probably that don't know where this is or what kind of commitment it requires to get there. Do you maybe want to put this in a position, I guess, for us everyday people?
Well, prior to the 1960s, Lake Pedder was kind of like the heart of the Southwest, geographically and spiritually and energetically and everything. And then in the 1960s, the Hydroelectric Commission, as it was then called, started constructing roads towards Lake Pedder with the view of flooding it and the Lower Gordon. I mean, Pedder was only ever an adjunct to the Middle Gordon scheme as a hydroelectric development. It was the secondary empowerment, which was just a backup reservoir. And I mean, so it's a very long story of lies and stupidity and so forth. I mean, apart from the else, one has to reflect on the fact that I would think none of the politicians who voted to flood this lake had ever been there, had the slightest idea what was involved. And if they had gone there, they still would have flooded it, because they just didn't have the mindset to appreciate it. But anyway, it was a day's walk in, looking at range you can see at the end of the lake. I think that's the Sentinels, or maybe the Sentinels is further over. Can't remember, but the Sentinels is probably the further one. So the Gordon River Road was beyond that sort of middle range there, and we walked from that, and sort of it was a bit of a climb, a few hundred meters over the corner of the Sentinel Range, and then basically a slog across button grass plains, probably about 5-hour walk in fierce heat, and the same back out again.
Was there a few planes landing at the time as well?
I don't actually remember. There probably would have been, I think.
Because that big, for the viewers at home, that big white stretch was sometimes used as an airstrip as well, so they could fly in there and recreate out there as well. Yeah,
very much. And this is also, I mean, there's not a very good photograph because I photographed this off a 2¼ square print, which has been sitting in a drawer for the last 50 years. So, but it's not a bad shot. But oops, now it's not advancing. So how do I get it to advance? Maybe I'll go over here. There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So initially I had an old, I think it might have been my grandfather's twin lens reflex camera. It's one of those ones you look in the top, which I never liked looking in the top, but I was just using it basically as a sort of glorified snap camera. And my brother and I, we were both sort of equally into the bush at that time. And this is us on Twilight Tarn. We sort of just raced off and did the craziest trips. Even in our first year walking, did the craziest trips. It's a wonder we got away with it. And here we are. We went to Twilight Tarn in winter, and then it sort of had this massive dump of snow overnight. We didn't have snowshoes or skis, so we had to slog out in this waist-deep snow. Which, of course, we complained bitterly about, but we took it all in stride.
So is that you or your brother?
That was my brother. Sorry. Yeah,
oh.
Yeah.
Is he older or younger than you?
He's 3 years older. Yeah. So I basically sort of I've got a better camera, a little Voigtlander for a few years, but almost only one of the photographs I ever took with that camera ended up in above the only sky. So I don't think I was shooting. Mostly I was just taking record shots of bushwalking trips. But when I was at university in 1975, I got a small inheritance from my grandmother, and I decided to get a proper camera, which there was the Olympus RM1, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made, I think. And those of you who can cast your minds back that far, the Olympus was revolutionary because it was the first SLR that was compact. Up to then, SLRs generally Nikons and Canons and Pentexes, all these great brick-like things with brick-like lenses, and Olympus produced a 35mm SLR, which was about almost half the weight and half the size, and the lenses were scaled down too. So it's just a brilliant piece of machinery for bushwalking, just absolutely ideal. and the optics were excellent too. And I remember once, I'd sat down with a slideshow with a friend who was showing some slides, and they weren't particularly good shots, but I was just amazed at the image quality. And that's when I sort of thought, geez, I'd like one of those. So I went and got myself the Olympus and several lenses. And this is one of the early shots that I took. And this was one of my earlier sort of kind of fairly ambitious solo expeditions. 1976, I think, I traversed the southern Franklands and then went out west over Remote Peak and corner of Cinder Hill, which I describe in my book because I almost died of thirst. But I had this amazing morning, this one absolutely amazing morning on the Franklands where I got several photographs which did end up in the book. This being one, absolutely enchantingly beautiful. So
it's like something out of a movie, really, isn't it? That scene. Yeah.
And so I took a lot of photographs with mist. I came to love mist a lot, and I never had the urge to go into large format. Or I did occasionally toy with the idea of going to medium format. I looked at the medium format Pentax and so forth, but they're like, that was back to brick status, and I did have the weight to think about. But I liked the spontaneity of 35mm cameras, and at the same time, I also think somebody once said to me, like, the thing about 35mm, it's a bit more like what the eye sees. I mean, what they meant by that was that when you're looking around, I mean, you don't see something with crystal clarity. You sort of see a kind of a blur. I mean, it's a bit of a kind of dodgy argument, maybe, but I think what I'm really getting at is that there's a impressionistic dimension when you don't have the luxury of heaps of detail and resolution. You're kind of forced to rely on impressionism to convey what you want to convey. And indeed, what I did want to convey, a lot of it was impressionistic. I mean, mist and cloud and so forth, there's something very moody, and certainly very much part of the mood of the Tasmanian wilderness. And of course, the other beauty of 35mm is that you can carry longer lenses like zooms and so forth. And this was taken with a zoom, which probably wouldn't have been able to carry if I'd been carrying a larger format camera. So already you're seeing a pattern in terms of the style of photography I was particularly taking. But I mean, this was in the Babiani sky. It's probably one of my favorite photographs. Just the way the sun is kind of almost hinting through in the mist, and that barely seen spire of rock down the bottom. This is the kind of thing I really enjoy. I mean, but one thing I'll say also is that particularly these days, I generally don't say too much about where I take photographs, particularly not if they're in remote areas and off-track areas. So that's the kind of warning. Ahead of this evening, there's some place I just won't say where they are. I mean, I don't mind saying this in the Eastern Arthurs.
Yeah, that's completely understandable, Martin, with the way social media and all that is, and it's something that we've talked about a lot on this show before, and
Right.
something that we're very conscious of, and it's it's a bit of an interesting topic in itself, but we certainly completely understand your reluctance to tell us where things are if you don't want to, and we won't reveal where they are if we know.
Well, I trust you guys, but it's just there's everybody else. Yes, it's jacking them. But I mean, there is a accepted ethic in the bushwalking community, or some of the bushwalk community, that you don't reveal locations because it's part of the wilderness ethic too, and part of the wilderness. The value of wilderness is that it's unknown. It's there to be discovered rather than already laid out, on the path before your feet.
Yeah,
Very true. Yeah.
So, it's a bit difficult to say where my artistic influences come from, but I've always had a bit of a liking for Chinese art and Japanese art, like traditional East Asian art. That sense of the empty canvas, the space, and also the kind of it's what's not said is as important as what is said. And perhaps this photograph might convey that a little. I mean, it's the kind of photograph I probably wouldn't take these days, but it just struck me as being, it says something. It said something to me at the time, and I took several shots because to get the timing of the wave right. So I like the way the wave is breaking in the background. So there's a kind of sound, auditory dimension to this picture, which in a way is also reflected in the shell. The idea that if you put a shell to your ear, you hear something. So those kind of elements were there. This was actually one of the first time I ever published my pictures. I published a set of large postcards, which actually sold quite well. And I do remember once I spent a lot of time in the bush getting no pictures at all, and it was quite frustrating at times. And I do remember once I got back from some trip and I got dropped off or got a bus back to Hobart, and I lived up Davey Street at the time. So I was walking up Davey Street at night, sort of feeling very sorry for myself on a cold wintry night. And I passed a house which happened to have its curtains open, and I looked in, and on the far wall were my cards. And it's little things like that keep you, give you the energy to keep going.
Yeah.
I remember Chris Bell once famously described wilderness photography as a road of disappointments. And you guys can probably confirm, it is a tough road. It's a bloody tough road. And certainly, you do get a lot of disappointments, but particularly in terms of trying to get your work out to people, trying to sell it, and so forth.
Mm.
Is that a hermit crab in the?
Yeah, it was a hermit crab. Yeah.
I love this photo, and I love the story behind it too, Martin. It's fantastic. I'll let you continue on.
Well, this is one from Above the Only Sky, and if I had to choose one out of the whole book, this would be it. And I think it was one of all the pictures that stood the test of time. Kind of hard not to, in a way. I knew I wanted to photograph the falls. I mean, I'd been fascinated by that waterfall, and I mean, it's interesting. I still am fascinated by waterfalls. I have a very, very strong attraction, and I've spent much of the last few years chasing waterfalls. This is one of Tasmania's highest. In fact, I think it is Tasmania's highest.
It is. Yep.
Yeah. And the only proviso being that in very dry spells it pretty much runs dry. But I was lucky enough to be up there. I'd spent 2 or 3 nights up there. Got really heavy rain, and then got this amazing break after it. I mean, it looks like it's still coming in westerly, and I'd already figured out roughly where I could get down to a point where I could look back in the waterfall, and the rainbow just happened to be thrown in for good measure.
Yeah, it's amazing photo. And I don't know if you want to name it or not, but you proposed the name for this waterfall, and it has been accepted as the official name.
I didn't know that.
I'm looking right now, and it's named on the new TasMap 1 to 50,000s. So
too late.
So I don't know. Did you ever put it to the I can't say nomenclature board?
No, I didn't. No. I used it in my book. Look, I mean, the reason I called it Angel Falls is because it seemed to me like Tasmania's answer to the Angel Falls in Venezuela, which apparently is named after Mr. Angel. I mean, how crazy is that? It literally is named after somebody called somebody Angel.
Yeah, right.
So it's not quite as mystical as one might hope.
It's not a well-known waterfall in terms of the general public, because it's very hard to get to. You can't just go and photograph this waterfall like this. It's a very, very difficult thing to get to, and to get these conditions just shows the commitment that you had. And it's also not a well-known fact that this is, in fact, Tasmania's highest single drop waterfall. Most of the time, people say it's either Montezuma or St Columba Falls, but this is in fact significantly higher than both of them. So it's a little bit of trivia there for the wilderness buffs out there. But it's such an amazing place, and the story of it in your book is just fascinated me from the moment I read it. So thank you for going out and getting it, Martin.
You're most welcome. So after Above the Only Sky came out, well, I was involved in various things, but part of what I did in the mid '80s was to try and focus on unprotected areas for a while. And I don't think I was terribly successful photographically. One thing I will say is, I mean, I used to regularly go out for 2-week trips and come back with nothing, literally nothing, or maybe 1 or 2 snaps. And things have improved a lot over the years for various reasons, including I think I've got a better idea about what I'm doing. Weather forecasts have made a big difference. You mentioned like spending a long time in the tent. I don't spend as much time in the tent as I used to because I'm more strategic now, and I can be more strategic partly because of weather forecasts. So that's less relevant on very long trips. But this trip, I was intending to photograph mountains. I actually went out to the top of Mount Hawes because I had this vision in my head of what the King Williams, the King Williams would look like, with snow pouring, with rain pouring down the slopes and snow on the caps and so forth. And it was a completely false vision. I mean, the chances of getting the photograph that I had in mind was practically zero. And I spent several days up on Hawes in sub-zero temperatures, getting frozen solid. But when I was up there, I looked down and I saw this what looked like a very nice patch of forest. So I dropped down off the mountain and wandered in here, and this is what I ended up with. One day I saw these beautiful sunbeams, so I took this shot. So the lesson here, which has been very much the story of my life, is that you generally don't get the photograph you're looking for.
And you have to be open as well to not getting that photograph. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make, that they have this vision in their head, Martin, to go out and get a specific photo or type of photo, and then their mind seems to close as to the other possibilities that are around them at the time.
Well, I mean, I'm in a kind of horror of there's the Instagram effect of where people go out and just try to duplicate photographs. I know you've probably seen photographs like the photographer's scrum at Horsetail Falls in Yosemite. Yep. When Horsetail Falls does its thing and turns brilliant orange 2 or 3 times a year, and there's about 50 people all standing on each other's tripods trying to get the picture.
Oh, a lot more than that. A lot more than that.
It's like 1,000 now.
There's like the Mesa Arch and a few of those other places, isn't there?
Thanks for the warning.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't. I sort of can understand the mentality, but I can only really understand. I can understand how a novice photographer might try to emulate photographers, just sort of as a way of a stepping stone to developing their own art. But to me, the whole point of art and photography is to do something different, to do something unique, and the thing is, in landscape anywhere, there's always the opportunity to do that. That's the crazy thing. There's absolutely no excuse for reproducing anything. And I mean, I try to take. Let me put it this way: I particularly like to take photographs which can never be taken again, even by me. And of course, the beauty of atmospherics is that you're guaranteed that, because you're never going to get the same atmospherics again. And interestingly, I mean, generally speaking, nature never repeats itself, whether it's a close-up or whatever. I mean, that's the beauty of it. And I mean, I also like to take photographs which no one else has ever even seen. And I mean, who's seen this tree here? I mean,
and you must have been to quite a few places, Martin, too, on many different visits, and probably had the chance to see so many different moods of the same place.
Yeah, well, that's definitely the case. And I mean, one of the my long-standing dilemmas, which I'm sure you can relate to, is, do I go to a place and sit around waiting for what I have in mind, or do I keep moving? Or do I just give up? And there's no answer to that. I've done a bit of both, and I'll mention that again a few times in some of the other photographs I'll show. But basically, going to a place and waiting for a shot is a mug's game, and particularly in Tasmania, where you could be waiting for 50 years and you wouldn't see what you want to see.
Mark, can I ask you to reflect on something that I often think of, and I think of you in particular? And I'm guessing you must have considered this in all the solo time you've had out. I would absolutely argue that you are a human being that has been a lot of places on Earth, even little pockets of places like this that potentially no one on this earth has ever been. I mean, that's probably an arguable comment, but I would say that's probably quite true for a lot of the pockets and places that you in particular have got to. Is that something you reflect on, or you're present to, or even wonder about sometimes? And is that part of your drive to get to these places that few people have the commitment and wherewithal to even attempt to get to?
It's a big question, Paul, and a good question. I mean, first of all, let us all acknowledge the Aboriginal people and the fact that many of these areas, some of them at least, would have been visited innumerable times over 40,000 years that Aboriginal people were in the state. So if we talk about, I mean, there may well be areas in Tasmania where Aboriginal people hadn't been for a long time. Perhaps some areas, even like right here, for example. I don't know. I mean, but parts of the Lower Franklin catchment, for example, may not have been visited since the last ice age. We don't really know that, and we're finding out more all the time. But so let's confine ourselves to the last 200 years. But the answer is yeah. I mean, very much so. And this comes right to the heart of what I think is valuable about wilderness. I mean, to me, there's a quality in wilderness, a very special quality. And I would put it like this tentatively. If you go into an enclosure where there's large animals, you're aware that the animals are aware, right? You know they're alive. They're sentient. They're seeing. They're living beings. And I would say that in wilderness that I have the same sense. And this was the mystery that confronted me right from the start. This sense that it's not, you're not walking against a backdrop of scenery. You're walking in the midst of a living being. That the landscape itself is alive, the wilderness itself is alive, and I feel that in areas that are very remote and very untouched, there is a very special quality. And if I were to try and explain it, I would say, look. Think of all the rains and think of all the sunny, the sunny hot summer's days. That's been going on for thousands of years, millions of years. There's like this vast conversation of energy that's been happening in the midst of its landscape. This living being, in a sense, this is a living being that's been alive for millions of years. And there's not only that, but it's been alive silently. There's an incredible quality of silence in the wilderness, and I think that quality of silence is something which is very easily disturbed by a noisy man, by noisy human beings. I think it's something that's very easily damaged and lost, and so. The risk of kind of sounding like a complete maniac in saying all this, that to me is the greatest reward of going into these, quote unquote, untouched places, at least untouched for a long period of time. That you're walking to some place which has got that kind of quality of pristineness about it. It's like the dawn of the earth. There's a newness and freshness, but an incredible sort of untouched quality of silence to it.
Is silence? I know you've done a lot of work on sort of refining the definition of wilderness. Is silence an aspect of what you consider when you put forward those sort of ideas?
Well, it's interesting that there is now a movement in some parts of the world, like United States and elsewhere, to talking about natural quiet and not so much. Natural quiet in the sense of freedom from anthropogenic noise. I mean, you can have wind or animal calls, but that is, so there is a recognition. In the work that I've done so far, it's not directly taken into account, partly because like Grant and I and others have been building on pre-existing models of wilderness. But what I will say is that, I think particularly in Australia, Australia is really kind of the birthplace of the model of wilderness modelling it was adopted in the late 1980s, 1990s for assessing wilderness values across Australia. And there was an attempt to put into scientific and objective terms the the qualities and the conditions that are necessary for the experience of the wilderness that we've been talking about, which includes silence. So, for example, distance from roads. I mean, if you distance from roads is a very crude measure, but if you're 10 kilometres from a road, you're unlikely to hear traffic. So this, the remoteness is something which, because Grant and I have been beating drum about for some years now, and remoteness is the one thing which is a good proxy measure of being away from those influences which destroy the kind of silence you're talking about. A bit of change the picture.
Martin, we've just had a question on YouTube just around, do you come across much wildlife that are kind of curious to see you? Maybe they're not used to seeing other people around, like when you're camped or anything like that?
Very rarely. The amount of mammal life one sees, marsupial life, is usually very small, very low. I mean, wombats are fairly common. Bird life is much more common, but generally sort of keeps its distance. I have had a few interesting encounters with wildlife. For example, it was in the World Valley once. I was camped under a fly rather than in a tent, and heard the sort of rummaging on my pack as a opossum, and it was, but it was a ringtail, and I'd never actually seen a ringtail before, and I just reached out and stroked it. And it probably hadn't seen a human before, but it was just completely cool about my presence there.
And if you didn't know anything about ringtails, that will not happen to pretty much most human beings.
It's interesting you say that, Martin, because I guess really you're talking about the southwest corner of Tasmania, as opposed to, which is true wilderness, of course, as opposed to, say, like the overland track, the Cradle Mountain, Lakes of Clare National Park. You'll see plenty of marsupials throughout the park, but in the southwest, it is quite rare, particularly in forest, to see much in the way of any large animal life.
That's right. I mean, certainly what you say about the overland track. I mean, there's lots of eastern quails and heaps of wallaby life and so forth, and the Central Plateau the same. And I was once on the overland track. Well, actually, I was once camped on the overland track and woke up on this eastern quail on my sleeping bag. And another time I saw a spotted tail quail which came up, almost within arm's length of me, just put its front paws up on a log, looking around. Beautiful animal, but perfect. Its fur was in perfect condition, just perfect health. The southwest. I mean, I don't fully know the answer for that, but I mean, generally speaking, I think the southwest being mostly quartzite is very low nutrient rock. So from what little I know of ecology, I think practically all the nutrients in the soil come from rain, because almost none of it comes out of the bedrock. So there's not a great deal of sort of biomass to sustain a large population. So generally speaking, it's pretty thin pickings as far as fauna is concerned.
And that also sort of brings us round to the point that Paul was making before about and that you made about being in places that maybe people haven't been for quite a long time. And when I think about the southwest in terms of Aboriginal occupation, obviously it's changed as the climate's changed and glaciation and all that sort of thing. But the thing that I think about there is, because there isn't a lot of mammal life down there, it would be quite difficult for them to, it'd be an undesirable place for them to live in those wilderness forests, because the food wouldn't be there. That's my theory and thought, but it may not be correct. Of course, the coastline is completely different, but those forests deep in the southwest wilderness. I mean, there is certainly very much lots of examples of Aboriginal occupation, but from quite a long time back, when there was glaciation and that sort of thing. So I think more in the last 10,000 years that might have dropped off.
Yeah, well, I speak with no expertise.
No, same here.
I mean, I think it's true that it's like the Kutakini Cave and other Aboriginal occupations, that date back 10,000 years or so on the Lower Franklin were apparently sort of deserted when that country used to be dry grassland in the Pleistocene and turned to forest. So but there's also some evidence that Aboriginal people did venture into forests, at least in parts of Australia. But I suspect that, for example, the extensive dense forests of the New River catchment, there would have been the Aboriginal people probably didn't venture in there much at all, for at least the last 10,000 years, because they're almost impenetrable, and there would have been very little payoff in terms of food or anything else, I would think.
Yes. Yeah.
This photograph is an example of the one that almost got away. That's the story of quite a few photographs, I'm sure you know. But I'd camped on this in a bit of a forest back of a moorland, and I wasn't expecting anything much to happen, and just came out and thought, oh my God, I saw this sky, raced back and got the camera and just got one snap before the sky had changed irrevocably.
That's probably a rather rare sight in Tassie too, to see big storms like that. It doesn't. Maybe that's just my limited experience out in the bush. But,
well, it's also an example of the camera. You take a photograph to convey a moon, and it doesn't necessarily have to tell the truth. I mean, it looks like a formidable storm. In fact, it was only a shower, but that doesn't matter really. I mean, to me, it's more the feeling that it conveys. I'm not particularly sort of careful, to be honest. I mean, that what I see and feel, often what's the case is you can see and feel something in wilderness, and at that moment there's no way you're going to get a photograph of it. But another day and under different conditions, you can get a photograph which conveys that feeling, that impression, even though the conditions are quite different. You understand what I'm saying?
And it's classic Tassie to have like bright blue sky behind that, of course, as well.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think it was just a shower of rain, and then it turned out sunny again later. I think it was a long time ago.
Oof.
Federation Peak.
Oh, it's just so jagged, isn't it?
It's an amazing place. I've been back there many times, and it never fails to be, even more impressive than it was before.
I was just watching the film about Alagus, a little bit about Pedder, where it mentions that Alagus was the first person to go up here solo, and it took the first group of 6, I think, was it a couple of weeks or something, to actually be able to get in here and actually ascend it. Like I don't think, for people that don't understand, this is a very significant place to get to, and it requires a lot of courage and commitment. And I'll have to say, it's still one of my nemesis ones that I haven't quite got to the top of myself. And that huge big open face with that, I don't know how many 1,000 feet drop underneath, just has just balked me at the courage it must have taken for those early people. And you would have been one of the earlier people too, and some, at least photographers anyway, Martin.
I think 75 was the first year I went there, and I guess mainly what was in my favour was my brother and I were both sort of had the belief in our own indestructibility, and we spent 2 days holed up in the tent in appalling weather and hanging lake, and then we had this window of halfway decent weather late one afternoon, and thought, let's go and climb the peak. So we shimmied up the peak, and we got up to the top and it started to snow. Oh my God, it's just this terrible, horrendous cliff face you've got to climb back down in snow. Yeah. We were with somebody else we'd met, and I think it was mainly because this person managed to navigate back to Hanging Lake, because it wasn't at all clear where to go. I mean, we're just flying by the seat of our pants. I climbed it a few times since, but I don't climb it anymore. I mean, it's one thing I just is off my list now. I don't take the risk of climbing it. I don't. It's scary enough getting over those peaks, out to the peak and doing the southern traverse. And I mean, Jeeves Gully still puts the fear of God into me. But that's enough for me. I mean, because I just don't feel the risk is worth it. If you do peel off, you're dead. I mean, there's absolutely no two ways about it.
That's sort of
people-
find it's the scenario too where looking at the peak is probably more attractive than being on top. I could be wrong, but
No, definitely right on that.
yeah.
No, there's many very, very spectacular views, and the summit you don't really get to appreciate very much. Yeah, so
it's
Because
definitely
you're scared for your life.
It's an amazing peak, but it is deadly, and it has claimed many lives over the years. Federation Peak. So for anyone watching that thinks, oh, that might be a bit of a challenge, well, yeah, it's a real challenge, and you have to know what you're doing. Some groups take ropes for safety, but even with ropes, it's still a difficult prospect, and you have to have some. There's definitely some rock climbing aspects to climbing the peak, although not hardcore rock climbing because the bushwalk is going up. But yeah, just bear in mind that Federation Peak is not for the faint-hearted, and it's and if you need any hints or tips on it on what it looks like, then have a look at YouTube and have a look at Google Images for Federation Peak, and have a look at some of the
Winter on the Blade.
Yeah, have a look at some of the photographs taken of people looking up at the camera with Lake Jeeves directly below. It's Australia's. It's quite terrifying to see those photos, and it's Australia's
drops.
It must be one of the most exposed faces in the whole country for sure.
So it's the highest cliff in Australia, from Federation Peak down to Lake Jeeves,
and it's also closed at the moment as well, of course.
Yes, it's the track's closed, so
because of the fires that came through.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting place, and I'd love to get there myself one day. I'm not sure that's ever going to happen, but
that's probably my dream. I'll hang the camera up after that one, probably. I don't know, but no, it's definitely on my radar too. But yeah, goodness me, it strikes the fear and I've got into me just thinking about it.
I think it has reopened actually.
Is it okay? All right.
There's a numbers limit now. They have to register. There's numbers limit.
Well, I think the eastern afters are still closed. You can go in via Moss Ridge.
Oh yeah, the
yeah. Oh wow.
So yeah, so this is this is another of my sort of favourite old golden oldies. But it is very much a surrealist shot, and one of the things I like about it is that, at least initially, I think one looks at it and they think those are very strange clouds, and it takes a while to work out why they're strange. The reason being that they're not clouds at all; it's valley mist. So you're looking down and not up. I did a lot of some of my photography when I was working, for parks, either doing as the track managing officer, or when Grant took that job over, I became his sidekick, and so did the same trips all over again. And we'd been out to the spires and had, I think, 10 days of absolutely appalling weather. On the last night, the forecast was good for once, so we decided to stay up in the Denisons and see what we could get. And the next morning was cloudless, at least as far as the sky was concerned, which is actually not that good for photography. Everything was too clear. And you're sort of scratching your heads thinking, well, what can I photograph? And I was wandering around and looked down, just by chance saw this. And I had no idea what the exposure would be shooting into the light. So I just sort of, winged the exposure. And then only a couple of shots later, Grant got up and started packing out his gear, and he was out of earshot. So that was it. But, just one of those lucky instances.
Yeah, that's quite an epic photograph. So that's Grant.
Yeah, that's Grant.
Yeah, that's
funny. I wondered if it was straight away.
Yeah, that's definitely one to treasure. It really is fantastic.
So for the other guests who haven't been on the show too long, we've actually had Grant with a show on his own on his incredible book Winter Light, which I'm guessing potentially some of it his sidekick might have been on board for some of those.
Yes.
Another thing I got into a bit in my film days was surreal close-ups. This is a sandstone detail down at Southgate Bay. It just sort of struck me. It's kind of like a little miniature landscape almost, almost like an alien landscape. And it was also a lesson in that if the first law of wilderness photography is take the photograph now, because you know if you don't, you may never get it again. And I mean, initially I was actually, as is so often the case, I was actually somewhat disappointed with the result, because the background's slightly out of focus and doesn't worry me now, but it used to. And so I went back some months later to reshoot it, and the coloration had completely disappeared. And so the photograph was never to be seen again. And this is another sort of surreal one, which I kind of like I don't title many of my photographs, but this one's called River Rock Forest Fire. It's actually
very good name.
A close. I mean, this was on a 12-day trip to a remote gorge, and all that effort, and I didn't get any shots of the gorge that were worthwhile at all. But I was just walking along in the gorge one day, and it was almost like this little rock called out to me, hello, and looked down and saw these amazing veins of coloration in it. And the sun was sort of coming in and out of the clouds, and I didn't want the sun. I wanted some sunlight, but not too much sunlight. So I had to wait for it was just enough sun, not too much, just to get that kind of glint.
Never seen anything like it, man. I find it hard to believe that's a single capture, to be honest.
Yeah, no,
it looks like a multiple exposure.
You look at it and like all of a sudden it pops into being a forest, and you're like, what? Is this a rock or what?
That's the first thing I thought it was.
Yeah,
it's like a painting of a smoky bushfire. You've got the blackened trunks, and you've got the flames coming in from the sides, but between the trunks you've got what looks like a smoke or mist shrouded forest beyond that. It's really it's astounding photograph.
Wow.
It is.
So one of the things I should just say, one of the things I like about surrealism, I mean, when I say surrealism, I'm not that much into Salvador Dali, but Magritte, for example, I think his work is excellent. The beauty of surrealism is that it kind of takes what we call reality and turns it on its head, which is probably where it belongs, because you see, what we call reality is actually mostly just us seeing with by habit. We see things habitually, and therefore we're not actually seeing them. You know, you look at a mountain and you see a mountain, so you're not really looking at it, and so on and so on. And surrealism kind of jolts the mind out of that pattern, that habit, and challenges you to see things differently. And in that jolt, there's a possibility that you do get a deeper insight.
Wow.
Yes. This was another shot when I was getting paid for being out in the bush. And Grant was with me, and needless to say, we were both going berserk with our cameras. It was one of those mornings that you give your eye teeth for. The kind of morning that happens about once every 100 days of bushwalking, if you're lucky. We'd already had a spectacular sunrise, and then this happened. And so I'd been shooting the sunrise, and then by this stage the sun was already above the horizon. And looking through the viewfinder, the sun was so bright I couldn't actually see anything through the viewfinder. I couldn't read I couldn't compose, and I couldn't read the exposure. But I knew I'd get lens flare. And so I had the bright idea. I thought, well, at least if I get the sun in the middle of the picture, the lens flare will be symmetrical. And I had no idea what it would look like. And the exposure was also, of course, extremely problematic. So I just took a wild guess, and this is what I got.
It's a very happy lens flare, that one. You don't see it that often looking that good. So well done.
Yeah, just pure luck. I mean, there's a lot of luck involved, which is part of the fun. I mean, that's the thing. You're not in control. Which it's a big part of why I do it. I mean, it's just you're dicing with luck all the time. And
one thing I wanted to ask is your relationship with like how many rolls of film and how many photographs do you have access to on a trip like this? Someone like Pedder, he might have 12 plates on a 3-week trip, on a large format camera, and Alagus would have done quite differently, I guess, with his lighter 35mm kit. And that's obviously something you got to weigh up for your extended trips in particular. Did you have a big dance with that over the years, or you always tried to take quite a lot, or you restrict yourself to just a few rolls, or how did you sort of go with that?
I've always been sparing with the shutter, in the sense that there's not that many subjects which I shoot, and so but on long trips, I do remember packing, maybe a dozen rolls of film or maybe even more on very long trips. I think the most I ever shot, I think once, I'm talking about like 32 frames per reel. I think once I shot 7. That was probably my maximum. When I say sparing, though, that if I saw something that I thought was really good, I would sometimes shoot a whole roll of film just to nail it.
Gotcha.
So that wasn't a concern, but very often, probably too often, I left the camera in the pack, and that I still am like that to some extent. But perhaps since I've gone digital, I think I've kind of got a bit freer with the shutter. Obviously, you don't need to worry about how many.
Yeah, that was my next question. Have you found the move to digital really influenced you in different ways?
It's influenced me enormously. Yeah, I'll say a bit more about that when I start showing the digital shots. But
yeah, sure.
In fact, it's actually rescued my photography, I think. I actually got a shock only today, because for some time I've been trying to work out when did I stop shooting film and when did I start shooting digital, and I looked at the dates and they didn't add up. And it's just today I've realised that for 6 years I didn't take a single shot, and I'm really quite shocked at that because I don't remember that. I don't remember that happening.
Yes.
But
what period was that, Martin?
Of 2007 to 2013.
Right.
And I think part of the reason was that digital was starting to take over, but as you know, initially digital wasn't much good. I mean, initially digital wasn't as good as film. The film was starting to go out of fashion. I mean, I certainly, there were long times when I was working for Parks when I was only taking like a couple of shots like this a year, like 2 or 3 good shots a year, and that didn't bother me. Because one thing I didn't mention was I decided very early on I didn't want to try and make a profession out of photography. I didn't want it to become a job. I wanted it to be a labour of love. So I was lucky to find ways of making money and keeping bread on the table, so to speak, which still allow me time, and in some cases while I was working to carry the camera and use the camera. But there was an extended period when I wasn't taking many photographs. And I think at that stage I wasn't really particularly committed to photography. I mean, I know, for much of the 90s when I wasn't working, I was focusing on writing. So, there's been periods in my life when I basically haven't been a functioning wilderness photographer. I've just been taking a few snaps. And digital kind of was part of the reason that I've gone completely the other way, and the last few years got into a whole new passion for it.
That's good to hear. I'm curious to ask you, when you're walking, and clearly when you're walking through very difficult terrain, the camera is going to be away. But are you the sort of person that will have the camera accessible, and maybe not for those really rough trips into horizontal and borrow and that sort of thing, but do you have the camera accessible, ready to whip out at a moment's notice when you see something, or do you tend to walk somewhere with the camera completely away and then get it out at the end of the day, or when you stop for a while?
Yeah, more the latter. Yeah, more the latter. I mean, if I've got the pack all packed up, I mean, the camera gear will be reasonably accessible. So I mean, if something did happen, it wouldn't take me terribly long to get it out and hung on a lens. But obviously, that all takes time. But generally speaking, I go into a place where I can be more relaxed and have the camera ready, and then walk around with it and so forth, set up the tripod, etc.
Yeah, I asked the question because I'm very similar with the way I do things. I don't tend to shoot much while I'm walking. Even if there's something reasonably interesting, I tend to go somewhere and then sort of put the pack down and then go around and look for things to photograph. But I know other people work completely differently.
Yeah, I wish I was like that. I wouldn't have to keep on chasing after everybody all the time and being the last person.
Yeah,
I'm in Luke's camp. I always got a camera out accessible.
Yeah, you two certainly are. But it's interesting because I've always done it differently, and I was just curious to know how you went, Martin. With it.
Yeah, you're in my camp, mate. This shot was one I'd already spent a week on the peak waiting for and hadn't got. And when I say this shot, I mean the main one I was after was a much wider angle, But I think I sort of, figured that this telly shot would also be a possibility. So the first trip was no good, and then I went back there for another week and camped on the same peak again for another week. And the day I arrived, it was fairly hazy and not particularly attractive. So I thought I'll take a record shot just in case nothing happened. And then I spent the rest of the week up there, and nothing much happened. It was a bit of mist and so forth. And so once again, I packed up and went home disappointed. But the record shot is this. So it turned out that just this one snap I'd taken as a record shot turned out to be. It turned out to work.
The serrations and layers in that part of the world is just like nothing else, really.
It's
so astounding. Yeah.
Martin, is that just in terms of your approach to photography? How much would you have like a visualization sort of approach as opposed to just totally in the moment?
Well, there's a bit of both. I'm as I'll say in a little bit later, I mean, I've had various obsessions over the years, some of which have lasted for decades, chasing particular images or particular types of images, particular views. But very often, a lot of what I come home with is the stuff that was unforeseen. I mean, this photograph's a good example because I went with the intention of photographing a gorge and possibly some waterfalls in that gorge. And the gorge itself turned out to be not particularly, I don't know, well, I couldn't get what I want there, but upstream of the gorge, there was this image here, which it's just something that's a very simplicity about it, which just seems to fall into place really nicely. And particularly that low waterfall in the background there, which is kind of almost you don't even see it, but it's there, this sense of kind of depth in the picture.
Awesome.
And I don't remember. I mean, this is my favourite place in the world. Bryan Beach and New River Lagoon, and the country around is impossible to beat. But this is the only time I've ever seen this incredible S-bend in the river, and it was just, I guess, pure luck that I was down there at a time. And I'm not even sure if I intended to photograph the mouth of the river, but I bashed my way up to a nearby hill and found an outcrop and got this shot. And as once again, I was initially disappointed. I mean, it sounds crazy to say, but I thought, oh geez, I wish the atmospherics would be better, because the atmospherics, I mean, there's nothing much special about the atmospherics. It's just a bit of southwesterly cloud. But of course, in retrospect, the atmospherics are ideal because you don't want, there's enough going on in the foreground. You don't actually. It's better that the atmospherics are subdued.
It keeps the eye down as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. But this dissatisfaction drove me to go back there a couple of months later, and the S-bend had gone. The river had changed course back to its much more common. And as I say, I mean, I've probably been to this place a couple of dozen times over the years.
You make it sound so simple. I'll just head back there and get it again. That's another 5 days gone or something.
You start to learn over the years how futile that thinking is, but you still do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so finally into the digital world. So there was that long period where I took almost nothing, and then I picked up a digital camera. And initially I stuck with the Olympus, and the Olympus did the same kind of breakthrough again. They did to digital photography what they had originally done to film photography with the OMD, which is a compact, beautifully lightweight, beautifully engineered digital camera. And that's where I worked with for a number of years. And this is St. Columba Falls. And I mean, I show this. Well, it's still, I think, one of the best shots I've taken since I turned digital. And I mean, it's just so much kind of life in it and dynamism. I was up there working at the time, and I was driving somewhere on a road near St. Helens, and with this incredible downpour, absolute deluge for about an hour. And suddenly a light bulb went on. I thought waterfalls, and went to St. Columba Falls, and this happened. But the one thing about this photograph is I think I can say with confidence that it would have been impossible to get this shot on film. And the main reason I say that was because there was so much spray in the air that one had about half a second to take the photograph.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, how did you manage to get a shot like this?
Well, I had my
Great.
mark on. I put my back to the waterfall, bend over the camera, wipe the lens, and then turn around and go click, literally that fast. So I had no time to compose.
Wow.
So it was literally that fast, and then splat. You know, everything was covered in spray again. I mean, it's a miracle I got the shot at all, because I did this a number of times. But I had to set the shutter speed pretty fast, because there was no time to steady the camera. I mean, it just had to be as grab shot as grab shots come. And I cranked up the ISO a bit, which I normally didn't do. I think to 400. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the shutter speed was. I could probably look it up. But yeah, it was a classic grab shot. Took about a dozen shots, and some of them had spots all over them. And this one just happened to have the sunrise in it as well, you know, coming through really nicely.
Yeah, whenever I get that close with that kind of water, I literally just put the camera away and just go, well, it's not going to happen. So well done.
Well, the water was literally streaming down the camera, and I was lying on the fact the OMD is supposed to be sort of waterproof or moderately waterproof, water resistant anyway. But it was kind of, you know, in a way, it was like wilderness photography at its most raw and enjoyable. I was thinking, part of me was thinking, this is bloody great, you know, water everywhere, you know, just everything's crazy, and this amazing thing happening. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
Well done.
And this is, you know, the other end of the extreme in a way, but it's an example of a shot which this is taken on the Sony, which I use now, Sony A7R3, which is a 42 megapixel camera. And I mean, I'd like to think that I haven't got obsessed about resolution, but I mean, when I saw this, for example, I mean, I have to admit, I was thinking, more valley mist, I suppose I should get the camera out. I mean, literally thinking that. I've shot valley mist so many times before, and this doesn't look particularly interesting. There's a few trees, there's a few hills, and valley mist. Okay, and it just happened, you know. I mean, it just happened to be really nice, and part of what makes it nice is that what the extra resolution gives it in terms of the sharpness of the trees and the subtlety of the gradations.
So much detail.
Yeah.
Magnificent.
The depth of field of that is astounding.
And this is an example of a shot which again is unrepeatable. And of course the clouds make it. You know, without the clouds it would have been nothing. But that incredible kind of fork in the sky, and just as the sunrise, just a gift. You know, I got up with the camera, trudging around in the snow, wondering what would happen, and suddenly, you know, just an amazing sky happened.
So that was a planned trip for the snow, because it's quite a challenging spot in the snow, I'd imagine.
Sorry?
It'd be quite a challenging place to reach in the snow.
Moderately, yeah. Not really. Getting along the ridge was quite difficult.
Yeah. Oh, did you go down the ridge? Did you?
No, I came up.
I came up.
Yeah.
Because I love how you say moderately challenging.
I was going to say, Martin Hawes, baby. I don't know if I'd make it alive to get up there.
Both Luke and I have been up there separately, and both nearly killed each of us.
I often quoted as one of the hardest things I've done. So that's it's just moderate in the snow. So that's really encouraging to know.
Us the immortals.
But we have seen the sort of trips that you've done. So it's not surprising to us. It just separates the men from the boys, really.
It sure does. Yeah.
One of the advantages of having done extremely hard trips is that when the going does get tough, you can also it's not as bad as such and such. The sort of consolation.
Or relative, I guess, as you say.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if you can see the right hand side of that, or was that partly obscured? But so obscured on my screen. But anyway,
we can see the peak.
No, you know, because I mean, so digital. Well, again, I mean, the beauty of digital is that you can post process. I mean, I'd been very reluctant to switch to digital, and see, part of the reason is that when I used to shoot film, it was because I had no interest in processing images. And I shot color slides, and the beauty of that is you click the shutter and your work's done, and you get it back and it either works or it doesn't, and that's the end of the story. And I wasn't interested in processing images, and of course you have to get a computer and have to get software and so on and so on. So all of that had kind of made me reluctant, and it was and to take the leap into digital was quite a big leap financially and learning curve and all the rest of it. But actually, I have to say that I've grown quite quickly to really enjoy the processing. And the last couple of years, particularly, I've got a lot more serious about processing photographs. Learned a lot more about Photoshop. I'm a fan of luminosity curves. I don't know if any of you guys are into that, but
absolutely, yeah.
I can't live without luminosity curves.
I still haven't gone there yet, but one day.
Paulie, missing out.
I mean, literally, it's a one-way street. Once you taste luminosity curves, there's no going back. They're brilliant. But like in this photograph here, I mean, just to bring up those shadows to balance the light. It's just a film. Well, this is the sort of film that a 4x5 film could probably be captured, but a 35mm you probably wouldn't. Well, yeah. I'll let that one speak for itself. That's a well-known peak, but I'm not going to say where it is. Unusual view of a well-known peak.
You don't need to know what it is. You just need to look at the photo and see those.
Exactly.
Spot on, Nick. That's the point, you see. And I mean, this is why. I mean, now I'd hesitate to name a place like Angel Falls or anywhere else, because I actually I delight in seeing so many of the places I photograph are unnamed. Waterfalls, peaks, valleys, unnamed. Long may it be so. And part of the reason is that naming is a form of colonization. Naming is a subtle degradation of wilderness values. As simple and as apparently innocuous thing as putting words to a place, you already reduce the mind's opportunity to see it for what it actually is, and you de-wild it. You de-wild it.
Yep.
Fantastic thought, Martin.
And here's a case in point. This fall is unnamed. I suspect I'm the only person who's been there in the last 100 years. Don't know for sure. It's in the Central Highlands somewhere. I'll be no more specific about that. Took me a day to find my way down into the ravine. It's very steep. But
looks pretty steep.
I kept hitting all these cliffs. And I mean, the thing about walking alone is, I limit the amount of risk I take.
Well, relatively speaking,
relatively
speaking, Martin.
As long as someone knows roughly where you are, Martin, then we'll come looking for you.
Well, to be fair, I don't think many people will be able to even get into the places Martin gets to. To find him.
We'll send Grant in, and the rest of us will just wait and with sandwiches ready for him when he returns.
Grant's the man. I mean, as I've said before, to me, the greatest joy of all is getting into a really remote country. There's a special quality that, number one, because it's so remote. Number two, because to get there does involve a tremendous journey. Maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and those kind of journeys just change your brain. You change your whole being. And I mean, one thing which people who want to fly in, by helicopter and so forth don't understand is that the process of walking in, what you're doing is it sounds so obvious, but you're experiencing the landscape through your body. It's not just a mental thing. It's not just a visual thing. It's not like looking out of a plane window. You're experiencing it through your legs, through your pores of your skin, the back of your neck as the rain's going down through and you have to, your whole body has to be attuned to the landscape you're moving through, the more so if you're off track. So it's an incredibly tactile relationship. It's a very sensuous and immediate relationship with wilderness. The scent of the earth, the scent of the lemon thyme, the scrub, poking you in the eye.
Redding skin off your body.
Yeah, it's all this intense experience. And at the end of it all, if you're lucky, you get a morning like this. It's just pure exaltation.
Beautifully described, Martin. I'm so enjoying your poetic way of reaching deeper into the conceptual nature of what we often sort of relate to, probably fairly unconsciously.
It is unconscious, and that's and on that point, Paul. Well, thanks for saying that. But this is where I think wilderness photography is. It's one of the things reasons why it's so important, because it's a way of connecting with people, even people who've got no conceptual, it goes straight to a part of the brain, a part of the mind, a part of the being, which one can connect to, because we, as Bob Brown's pointed out, over the years, we've all evolved in wilderness for millions of years. So it's somewhere at a deep level of our being, even in our DNA, we've got that connection with the wild. And we, in some level in ourselves, we are wild, we are part of the wildness. And a photograph can speak to that in a way that words, well, it's much more difficult words. I mean, I won't say that words can't, but a photograph is direct, and you can't argue with, you can't argue a photograph. It's straight in, And I mean, one thing I find interesting about photographs too is that a lot of the time, I think photographs, you don't very often come back to photographs. I mean, you look at photographs and you get the message sometimes in a split second, and that's all. That's it. I think it's fairly rare that a photograph bears subsequent looking at. I mean, I think it's probably a sign of a very good photograph that it does bear looking at many times, coming back to.
I think I could do that with your forest one in the rock. That's for sure. Come back to that one a few times.
Mm.
Well, that's that it's because that's the beauty of if it's an element of the mystery about something, that exactly, you don't quite know what you're looking for. So there's a story in there. It kind of reveals itself. It can tell you different things at different times.
Mm.
This is a very different sort of shot. This was another 10-day trip to a remote place where once again I came back not with what I wanted. And in fact, I thought I came back empty-handed, but I looked at this one and thought, well, no, it's got something different. And really, because what makes it is the light on the ridge in the foreground and that sense of depth.
It certainly has a sense of just a humongous place, I suppose, in the trees giving the scale.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. I didn't know this one, Paul.
Yeah.
And I don't mind naming this as Vanishing Falls because, it is an iconic place. But I went there summer before last with Grant, and I wrote this up on Facebook. And it was one of the best bushwalks I've ever done, which is saying something. It was right up there in every way. It was incredibly difficult. I mean, Vanishing Falls is always incredibly difficult, extremely, extremely demanding place to get to. And we had extreme.
Well, that's saying something coming from your lips.
Yeah, definitely.
We wanted the balance between there being enough water in the river for the waterfall to look good, but not so much that we couldn't wade down the river because you either have to wade down or up it. Otherwise, going through the scrub is almost impossible. An extra day's work or more. So we left in spring, and there was rain, but there was also snow and stuff, and there was fresh snow on the southern ranges. And at that time the Picton Road was still closed post the fire, so our options are narrow too. We went around the south coast, which was an extra 2 days. And New River Lagoon was exceptionally high, the highest we'd ever seen it. The boats were it was right up to the boats. Boats were almost floating at their moorings. And so we thought, oh my God, I'd been looking forward to the wading up the lagoon and spending the afternoon lazing around. That went out the window, so we had to wade up almost waist deep. It took us 7 hours in pretty cold water to get to, and then we had to climb Precipitous Bluff. And then we had to go over Precipitous Bluff and down to Kamarooka Ridge, and then the hard part started.
Yeah,
that's when it got difficult. And we left Kamarooka Saddle and plunged into the scrub. And after the first 4 hours, we'd made a kilometre, and I was thinking, I don't know if we're going to do this. Like for half a day, and we've only made 1 kilometre, and we had about 7 kilometres to go. But I had planned the trip meticulously, looking at the Google Earth and maps and so forth. And in fact, the planning was fine. And after that initial very bad scrub, we had more open conditions. And then the next day we had another band of scrub that took 4 hours to go 1 kilometre, and then waded down the river, and then we got to the waterfall. And all of that time, the weather was atrocious. But then we got to the falls, and we had 2 days of magnificent weather.
Oh, fantastic.
And
it's your reward.
it was just sublime, absolutely sublime.
Was that your first trip there?
Yeah, it was Grant's second trip. If
Yeah,
you know,
right.
a few people have been there, twice in the last 200 years.
Yeah, for those playing along at home, again, extremely difficult places you've heard to get to. There's probably 4 or 5 realistic routes you could go to get to these falls, and all of them are incredibly difficult. It's usually described as a 12 to 15 day trip, depending on which way you go and how you manage it. I think we've talked about it before when we had Matt Brain and John McLean on. They did it over the Southern Range and then down, then pack rafted and pack rafted out.
Right.
But the Vanishing Falls, for those that don't know, it's on the Salisbury River. It plunges over the cliff, as you can see here, and there's quite a lot of water at the base here, but often it just goes into a hole and then it disappears underground and follows a riverbed, but it's dry a lot of the time. And the riverbed was flowing this time, I assume.
No, it wasn't.
No?
I think it had been. And I got one shot of the waterfall reflected in the pool, and the pool disappeared overnight. But we'd intended to walk down the riverbed to Pungaluna Pool, which we did. But I'd read a number of accounts of walking down the riverbed, and they were all saying, the terribly slippery rocks and so forth. And Grant himself had done it. He said terribly slippery rocks, and I was living in fear, literally. I was just thinking, oh my God, I just imagine some leaping from rock to rock and slipping down, 6 meters and cracking your head open. It just sounded like an absolute nightmare. And it turned out to be a sheer delight. The rocks were actually mostly fairly small, and they were dry and they were speckled with lichen, and because the riverbed gets scoured fairly regularly by floods, there was only low vegetation, so you could practically walk down your hands in pockets. And it was a beautiful, beautiful, warm, calm, dead calm morning, dead silent, and you could just sense the immensity of the bush, immensity of all those miles. Wilderness in the incredibly dense forest. It's a seriously wild place. And, the wildness is so powerful you can cut it with a knife. You know what I mean? And there was all that sense and this immense peace and just the chirping birds. And and we got to Pungaluna Pool, which is a bit of a disappointment. It was pretty scrubby and boggy, but still we got there. And we went and had a look at where the river resurfaces as well. But it was just an absolutely delightful day. Oh, and I must show you this other shot. And the thing that's probably most interesting about it is that Grant is in the picture here, giving a sense of scale.
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
I used to have a bit of a hang-up about taking photographs of people in wilderness. And I mean, obviously, when I'm walking on my own, that's generally out. But Grant often gets in my photographs, and I can't always Photoshop him out. But in this case, it does. It gives you a sense of how immense those falls are.
Oh, they're big. Yeah. Oh, it shows the bowl that it drains into beautifully as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realise they were that big from the. You had included that.
Yeah, it wasn't until I saw Grant I realised the same.
Yeah.
And this fall is also one of Tasmania's biggest too. I won't say where this is, but not many people get out to this place.
I was going to say, yeah, that's another few human beings have seen.
I mentioned. I'll just talk a little bit about my obsessions. I know I don't want to take leave and sit all night, but one of my obsessions was like many decades ago. I was at a lake, Lowland Lake, and I saw these amazing ripples, which were a bit like this, except they were larger, and instead of blue, there was these incredible dark greens. So there was rich rainforest greens and black and white, and I don't think I even tried to photograph them because I knew I didn't have a chance, because these patterns are changing, it's in microseconds, very, very rapidly, and I didn't have the film. But ever since then, for many years, I carried 1,000 ISO film, hoping to capture something like it again, and I never did. I never did use that film. And because once again, digital comes in. I actually took this photograph on the foreshore here, where I live, only a few weeks back. So it's cheating a bit. It's not wilderness, but it's an example of the kind of things you can see if you got your eye out for it.
Yeah.
Just these amazing psychedelically beautiful patterns. So it's something else I'm still looking for, and maybe I'll go back to that lake and have another go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this spike was another thing I kind of had in my mind for a very long time, because I'd seen it from Federation Peak, from that distance. I noticed it on the horizon. Thought, yeah, that looks interesting. I wonder what it's like out there. And it looked almost like it could be a freestanding spire, hundreds of meters high. And it sort of is. It's just joined on this near side, but it's still pretty big. And anyway, it was quite a challenge to get down to it. But and this photograph, it's kind of a record shot, but it's unusual. I mean, again, an unusual shot of Federation Peak.
There wouldn't be anyone else with a photo like that, Martin.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
No.
And that spire is also there. That's the sort of like center right is that spire.
Oh, right.
So another trip I took, for the same to
Oh,
satisfy the same urge to try and
Holy
photograph
smokes.
this spire. And it turned out that the whole hillside, I mean, it speaks of the ruggedness of the landscape.
Just a quick climber up the hill.
I mean,
No worries.
Tassie is so rugged, and because that's why much as I love the Central Highlands, the Southwest is really my place, because it is so. It's just it ratchets up the ruggedness, to 11 basically.
And it probably speaking to the remoteness value as well. It's probably where the greatest concentration of that remoteness would be.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. Certainly, then the New River catchment is like the real heart of it, but some of the Wild Rivers country as well. In the heart of that, it's very, very wild. There's nothing really to compare north of the Lyre Highway. Murchison catchment comes closest. Incidentally, Lake Malvina, is it's one of the remotest places on the eastern Central Highlands, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to keep it that way.
Yeah, maybe just talk about that in relation to your refining the definition of wilderness. Just give us a brief concept of the idea that you've put together with Grant and Chris in that document.
Well, in essence, what we're saying is that we think remoteness is central to what wilderness is. That's it in a nutshell. And the reason we say that is because, for example, if you do fly a helicopter in or build a hut in a remote area, for example, that hut damages the wildness of the surrounding country. It's not like the damage is confined to the footprint of the hut. If you're a kilometre from the hut, you're much less wild than you were before that hut went in there.
Yep.
And remoteness is the natural way to measure that. That's it in a nutshell. And there's a number also in remote country from an experiential point of view. The remoter you are, the more you're immersed in the landscape, the harder you have to work to get there, the more self-reliance you need. And when you do get there, there's much more of a sense of isolation from all the distraction and noise and so forth of the modern world. And you're being totally, as I say, immersed in a natural wild environment. So all of those reasons. So those all relate to the experiential values of wilderness, by which I mean recreation, but also the vicarious appreciation. Because the fact is, those of us who appreciate wilderness, we appreciate wilderness even if we don't go there, right? I appreciate the Altai Mountains. I've never been there. But that it's enormously important to me that these places stay wild and not rodent, not mined and logged and so forth. And part of the reason we've done what we've done is because there's been a major shift internationally and nationally towards defining wilderness on almost exclusively ecological terms, in terms of biodiversity and ecosystems and so forth, which are obviously of crucial importance. But if it's to the exclusion of experiential values, then we feel that something important is being lost. And Malvina is a shining example of that. Because if you say that wilderness is only about the ecology, then Malvina hasn't. Where's the problem? It's only got a small footprint. The helicopters aren't damaging anything except possibly the wedge-tailed eagles. So you could argue, if you could argue mistakenly, that it has very little impact. The fact is, it has an enormous impact because it it destroys the wildness of the central, the eastern, the whole part of the central planet. It's particularly in the near vicinity, and the best way to measure that is remoteness. And so that's why we've been pushing this particular barrier, both nationally and we've also had some success lately in getting IUCN, which advises the World Heritage Commission, to take our ideas on board as well.
That's a magnificent achievement. Well done.
Yeah, it's very, very important work, and we're deeply in debt to you and Grant and Chris for this publication and your ongoing commitment to it. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This is another on the trip that I did the photograph I just took. I mean, this was one of those trips where actually it was like some kind of magic wand and being waved over the whole range, because this most extraordinary conditions prevailed for about a whole week. Just amazing. And I was up, photographing other things, and I looked down and saw these bluffs, and snap, before it disappeared. And this was virtually in the same place in the same morning.
Whoa.
Just I mean, I guess one thing is, we could probably talk about this. We haven't got a whole lot more time, but I do like to break away from the mold of a particular style of wilderness photography. I mean, the thing about this is it's just very simple. There's nothing much happening, but it's just a simple statement. There's no great aspirations to be a sort of an all-encompassing message or anything like that. But I get depressed when I look at photographs, and it just seems to be the same pattern repeating itself. People following the same formula. And when I hear of people doing wilderness photography workshops, my hair stands on end, because I just think all these people are going to come away with the same idea. I mean, I know I'm being sort of intentionally kind of provocative, but what I'm getting at, the most important thing of all, the most important advice I give to any aspiring wilderness photographer is, look, learn to see your own way. Learn to the greatest challenge is to see something differently and to photograph it differently. And it's incredibly difficult, because there's millions, trillions, billion of photographs being taken every day. Yeah. Even in wilderness photography, there's thousands and thousands of photographs being taken every day. How on earth do you do something different? It's a huge challenge. But one thing in your favour is that nature is always different. And there's always the capacity to see something different. I'll stop frothing at the mouth now.
So what's happened to that myrtle? Is it?
It's a myrtle, yeah. I don't know why it's red, to be honest with you. I thought maybe it was dying, and maybe it is, but I'm not sure why it's red like that.
Very rare.
It's interesting. I was recently in a particular place up in the Tarkine, and there was a lot of orange and red sort of colourings on the myrtles at the time. It was really quite bizarre. And
is it lichen?
No. It was the colours of the leaves. And I know with new growth with myrtles, you get a brownness to the new growth, but it wasn't quite that. And I was a bit concerned. But I don't actually think there's a problem. I think it's just some phenomenon that I was there at the right time to see something that was just a bit different. It was probably to do with new growth.
Well, the new growth certainly can be quite red. Yeah.
But it was just the right time. I'd never seen anything like it. It was quite bizarre.
You can see all sorts of weird things. Paul and I saw a purple gum tree this morning. So
yeah, we did.
Oh wow, purple
bark.
Like a mauvey.
It was a very intense purple. It was real. So it's like someone painted it. Yeah.
This place has been another of my obsessions, and in the vicinity of the Great Ravine or the Franklin River. And I flew over this place back in the 1980s, and it was one of the most spectacular sights I've seen. And I've done 4 trips into this area now to try to recapture the photograph what I saw out of the window, always unsuccessfully. I've come to the conclusion that what I actually saw is only visible from the air. So one of these days I might treat myself to a helicopter trip. But in the meantime,
it's a slippery slope, Martin.
That does not look like easy country to get around, Martin.
Speaking of slippery slopes,
oh,
this was quite vertiginous getting in here.
Yeah, dear me.
Yeah,
this was the next trip. I came in from the western side of the river and looking up the same area up towards the Franklin.
I mean, Martin, I thank you for correcting with that comment earlier about, that you're one of the few people that has potentially even been places that no one's ever been. And I did have in the back of my mind, even with that comment about the Aboriginal people, because they wouldn't have a purpose to go out in a place like this, because it's dangerous, it's incredibly remote. There's limited resources that they'd be trying to capture or support, their people with, and to justify going out here. And that's kind of this photograph really speaks to that. The fact that you'd even consider walking through this country trying to get to some of these places.
Yeah, well, this was a slow trip, that's for sure. It took me
slow.
I think it took me 12 days to get here. No, it took me, I beg your pardon, it took me a week. The trip was 12 or 13 days, but it took me a week to get to this spot. Yeah, and certainly very slow in places.
Sense of achievement must be amazing.
Just talking about
after that effort.
How crazy I can be. I mean, this was the waterfall. It has got a name, but it's not on a track. There's just a few rough tanks, but basically it's not on a track. So I won't say where it is, but it's in the Central Highlands. But and it was the first time I'd come here, and the water was in full flight. It was springtime, and I particularly like this view, beautiful waterfall. The other waterfalls further up the river, but I couldn't find a way to get a shot which included the base of the falls because there were rocks in the foreground, and I tried to perch myself on various bits of bank and I couldn't get it. So I had this some kind of thing seized me. I went back to camp, packed up camp, walked out to the car, drove back to Hobart, went to a hardware store and purchased what we photographers call a quadrupod, and then came back carrying this said quadrupod across country. The whole thing was so spontaneous. I didn't even really think very carefully about how to carry the damn thing. I did look through my shed to see if I still had some old shoulder pads. And of course, I'd thrown them, having kept them for about 35 years, I think I'd thrown them away the previous week. So I just had a bloody rope over my shoulder, which was incredibly uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
That does not look light either.
No, it was about 12 kilos. I figured, 12 kilos and good. And it just fit inside the car. So it was ideal, really.
Need to get a Bailey sponsorship.
Well, it did the trick. So there you go, Scott. There you go. We got the shot.
Oh, I love the tripod on the top there.
Yeah, octopus straps to the. So the thing is, not only did I have to get the camera high, but I had to be up with the camera because of the spraying. I had to be able to wipe it and click. So that was one problem-solving exercise, and here's another one, which most people might think was taken with a drone, but it was actually taken my soon-to-be famous window cleaning extendable pole. No, I'll just leap forward. So the reason I got this pole initially was to photograph Reynolds Falls from the top. Because Reynolds Falls is quite inaccessible. It falls out of a deep slot, and you can get into the slot above the falls, but you can't get to the point. It's just too vertical. And if you slipped in the river, you'd be dead if you go over the falls. There was no way out. But I was just thinking, what attracted me, I was just enchanted by the beauty of the water as it sluiced to the top of the falls. And so again, this had sat in my mind for years and years and years. And for some reason, I just thought, I'll have another look to see if there's poles available. I'd looked online before, monopods and things like that. And, it turns out there are these window cleaning poles, the carbon fiber, all sorts of fancy things, And the one I bought ended up being extends to 9 meters.
9 meters.
I hung, and at the time, all I was doing was like a fishing rod. Just sort of,
reeling into marlin.
Put the camera on and fed it out. And of course, by the time you get it out about 6 meters, you've got this incredible torque.
Yeah.
If you did your high school physics, there's an incredible amount of torque. So I'm hanging on for dear life. Incredibly nerve-wracking. You've got $5,000 worth of camera gear hanging over a 60-meter drop, waving around. But I did get the shot more or less. It's not a particularly good shot, but I did get the shot I wanted. But it turned out, this turned out much better. And by the time I got here, I'd refined the technique a bit. I was now carrying a small step lever to use as a fulcrum for the pole. So everything was much more controlled and so forth. But I just set the camera on automatic shoot and guessed the exposure and kept it as steady as possible and hoped that the in-camera stabilization would get the shot I wanted.
How did you trigger the camera, man?
I just set it to automatic, just to take shots automatically every 5 seconds.
Gotcha. So not even, right. So it's
time lapse mode, yeah.
And you can delay it too. So you can set it, it doesn't start shooting until 30 seconds, and it shoot every 5 seconds for as many shots as you like. And the beauty of it was I could actually feel the shutter along the length of the pole.
Gotcha.
I could actually feel it go click. So it meant that I can move the camera in between clicks, which was an incredible bonus, which you wouldn't have expected. So there's another one for you, fellas.
Yeah, and
look, it's how you attach the camera to the pole now.
That's next level.
It's worth pointing out though, because there'll be people watching this going, "Oh, I can just do that with a drone." Well, yeah, you can, except you're not allowed to. In both of those places, you can't take a drone. You're not allowed to fly a drone without special permits. And
I'd also say, just add to that, to get a permit, it needs to be for commercial purpose. And, there's no operators out there. So good luck getting a commercial purpose.
Yeah. So that's innovation to get the shot. And, I applaud you for that, Martin. That's fantastic work. Hard work, but fantastic work. And I love that you improvised with a step ladder as a fulcrum for your second big attempt to get some window cleaning shots, pole shots. Because I think when you first talked about the Reynolds Falls, there was a massive discussion on your Facebook page, which I was part of, about how you could possibly improve it so you weren't, waving the thing around uncontrollably, trying to get the shots done. And clearly, the step ladder as a fulcrum was a bit of a compromise on that later down the track. Yeah,
no, that discussion was very useful. There was some of the suggestions were rather flippant, but no, there's some very useful. It did get me thinking. Come on, mate, put your thinking cap on. You can do this better. So yeah, and I mean, I put a pack weighted with rocks on the near end, and so basically, there's no pressure anymore, and I can just focus on feeding the pole out. And keeping it from waving it around too much.
Yeah, very innovative. Well,
you mentioned the slippery slope, and I mean, let's face it, we've probably all been tempted to use a drone at times, in the sense that, you think, oh well, a drone would be ideal for that, because you do get amazing things, and of course, Paul, as well as anyone, you can get from the air, you see a completely different world. So there is all that worlds, but at the same time, I mean, thank goodness we don't have drones in Tasmania, because you can imagine what a place like Dove Lake would be like. The air would be thick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are another way of degrading wilderness status.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whether there's anyone else there or not.
Yeah, no, they make a god awful noise. Yeah.
They do. This shot is just an example of me trying to break the laws of photography. If at least the rule of thirds. It is, I mean, it's not a particularly great shot, but I mean, I just like the verticality of it, and I kind of like the idea of that vertical line being almost like a tear between two realities. And this is the only night shot I've ever taken so far.
Come on, Martin, you've got to do better than this.
Auroras, Martin, all these locations.
Well, I nailed it in one day. But and I was up at Milkshake Hills. I was actually looking at the track that I'd realigned after the fire, and it was a full moon. So these trees are lit by the full moon. I just like the way you've got this, sort of the aftermath of an earthly apocalypse, with the stars in the background as a kind of reminder of a sort of cosmic perspective on what's happening on Earth.
Yeah, so just the audience, just tell you, this place was actually closed for years, and well, close to years, and yeah. So you're one of the people that first sort of ventured in to try and figure out how people can get back in and open it up.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I was employed to do that. Yeah, yeah, and they, yeah. I mean, it came up well. I think they've done a good job, but most of these tall trees are dead, you know, and because ultimately they're going to fall. But yeah, very sad, very sad. We've got, you know, part of a much greater tragedy. You know, that fire did a massive amount of damage to the Tarkine, but thank goodness it didn't get into the real remote areas.
Yeah.
That concept of the trees and the stars is something I've been playing on as well. It's a very powerful combination. So yeah, love it.
Oh wow, look at that shadow of the totem pole.
Look at that. I've never seen one with a shadow like that.
Sundial. Yeah. And you know, I was just down here again working for Parks, and just happened to get to Cape Hoy, and this is what I saw. But at the time, I only had a much cheaper camera, which I was using for work. And I thought, this is too good to miss. So I came back a week or so later and snapped it.
So for people that don't know, that pole is called the totem pole. I will say, because it's quite a famous place, and it is a accessible sort of walk. But it's one of the most sought after icons of climbing in this part of the world, and it requires actually getting across that water at the base out to the thing. I've actually attempted to climb the candlestick on the other side. It was one of the scariest things I ever tried to do. And there's a wonderful man, Paul Pritchard, which I might even consider asking him on the show sometime, guys, who's a credible writer and British climber, well, similar ilk to Martin in some ways in terms of their characteristics of appreciation of wildness and their capacity to explore it in word form as well as authors. So if you ever want to delve into the story of that particular totem pole and how it can change your life for better or worse, then have a look at Paul Pritchard's books.
So it's 65 metres high for those that need to know.
I've been told that it sways in a high wind as well.
Yeah, and it reverberates with a big wave hitting it at the bottom.
Which would be quite common. It's very wild seas there. This is a relatively recent photograph on the southwest coast, and you know, it's an example of what can happen in wilderness photography, because I knew I'd been to this place before several times, and I knew these marsupial lawns were there, and I thought, you know, there's photographic possibilities, and you know, it was calm, there was reflection, so I was wandering up and down. I spent about an hour wandering up and down, and really thought I couldn't see anything. You know, I just couldn't see anything. But then I put on. I mean, I love wide angle cameras, like lenses. I mean, I've always loved. You know, when in the days I had the OM1, I used to have a 21mm, and now I've got a zoom that goes down to 12mm, which is just, you know, you just do so much. And just happened to just put that lens on, and suddenly this practically leapt out of the viewfinder. Suddenly, bang! There it was. And I hadn't even noticed up to then the sort of the cloud movement. I don't think it was a particularly long exposure, but it was just enough to give that sense of movement. So, just all came together at once. Just one of those little gifts that happens if you've got the patience.
It's so remarkable seeing those marsupial lawns just enter the water like that too. It's quite surreal. Yeah.
And they're so fine too. I mean, you know, bowling green fine.
Exactly, like they're manicured. Yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't quite given up taking surrealist place-ups either. And I mean, because the beauty of this is the kind of thing you could step over or step into without even seeing it. You know, and many people would. You know, you just when we could. You know, I could if you just your mind somewhere else, and you look down. There's this extraordinary kind of mathematical. It's almost like Mandelbrot set happening at your feet.
Brilliant.
That is a big tree.
Yeah, I mean, I got lucky because it actually gives a sense of the size. It's quite difficult to do. And I almost missed the shot. You know, I packed up the camera because it was quite overcast, and packed up the camera heading back to the car. I thought, the sun's coming out, better set it up again. Almost missed it. But yes, the backlighting just is everything in that. Just caught the backlighting, just lifts everything and gives it a sense.
It just pulls your eye all the way up to the top.
Yeah.
So beautifully.
I mean, let's while we're talking about all this, let's stop to acknowledge the fact we were so damn lucky know, to live in a place like Tasmania. I mean, what a place! What an incredible place we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that, someone asked a question earlier on our chat, which we haven't addressed. Do you photograph? I mean, Grant, for example, photographs all over the world. Do you tend to do that? Do you travel much? Do you go other places and take pictures?
Nothing remotely like Grant, no. And so the short answer is no. And part of the reason is I've actually been so attached to Tasmania that I couldn't really see much point in going anywhere else. The nearest I've come, I've done a bit of travel, not recently. The nearest I come to going to other wilderness areas is in Russia. I've done a couple of trips, short trips to the Caucasus Mountains. I mean, awesomely beautiful place. Wow. And of all the places, you know, if I do get to go overseas, and I certainly hope to. In fact, I was intending to last year. I was all ready to go overseas for 6 months and back to Russia, and hoping to spend at least a couple of months in Russia. And I'd love to go back to the Caucasus Mountains, and I would love to go to the Altai actually, and to Siberia. And the Caucasus Mountains, well, what I saw, it's like Switzerland would have been 10,000 years ago. You know, it's the same spectacular beauty, but without the development. That's changed a bit in the last 20 years, but still there's a lot of that country. It is biosphere reserve. A lot of that country is still wild. I mean, you've got these incredible alpine meadows. You've got, you know, you've got a snow line. You know, glaciers. It's just an awesomely beautiful place. But you know, Chris Bell and Grant and many others have been all over the world. And they all say you can't beat Tasmania, and they all say it genuinely. You know, I mean, the world is an amazing place, and you know, there are obviously places which have got things that Tasmania doesn't come close to. I have seen the Himalayas, and again, I didn't take my camera intentionally because I didn't want the camera to come between me and the experience of seeing the Himalayas, and it was life-changingly awesome. That was many years ago, but there's many lives worth of work and enjoyment to be had in Tasmania. You know, I mean, and you mentioned I've been around, you know, I have been doing this for a long time, 50 years in fact, but I haven't scratched the surface of it.
Well, it's like it's one of those classic sayings: the more that you know that you don't know, isn't it? And you probably have seen so much stuff that you know you see something. Oh, I'd like to come back and do that, and then you go somewhere else. Oh, I'd like to come back and do that, and then all of a sudden you've got. It's hard to think of anything else to do.
Well, that's right, and you know, and obviously the scrub is the thing that you can have all these fantasies, but that's the thing that pulls you up. You know, you can get carried away with some grandiose schemes of trips to do, but when you're actually out there in the scrub, that's when you know reality hits, and you realise just how difficult it is. So that, you know, and long may it be so. And that's the beauty of Tasmania. There are places which are incredibly inaccessible, mainly due to the vegetation. Now, I've only got a few more pictures, so I'll just keep going. This is something quite different again, because one of the many advantages of digital is you can stitch to your heart's content. I think this is about 6 images, but I mean, this is one where, you know, I mean, I'd love one of these days when I'm rich and famous, I'd love to print this large, you know, like about, you know, 3 meters long or something like that, because you just get lost in just the quality of those waves. It's just so beautiful. It's just like a surreal landscape with these surreal kind of sand waves and the waterways in the background.
Yeah, unreal.
Yeah, just a couple more shots. This was a very recent trip to the Tyndalls, where the Tasmanian government, in its wisdom, wants to build another bloody iconic walk with helicopter service, accommodation complexes right by this lake. And the seriousness of that proposal didn't really hit me till I went back to this lake, because I hadn't been there for decades, and just realizing how wild it still is. I mean, this lake Huntley is still a very wild place, and there's no sign of human visitation at the outlet creek. There's no campsite or anything like that. No. So it's pretty, even though the area is not particularly wild compared to some of the ones we've been looking at, it's still you know, it's still in a very pristine state. And I had you know, I came down to the outlet creek. I'd been photographing around the lake and came down to the outlet creek, and I'd been looking up these cliffs and thought, geez, some reflections would be nice.
Oh.
Cha-ching.
Sometimes it works.
Money shot.
Next morning, I mean, blam, just amazing, amazing surreal reflections. And I got some mist as well.
Oh wow. Wow.
So the old
we had a bit of an argument, not an argument, but a conversation about what image to choose for describing this show, Martin. This is the one that spoke to me the most.
Oh, right. Right. Well, that's, yeah. I mean, yeah.
What we're trying to save and protect. What's the essence of wilderness?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting.
It has a spirituality to it, a delicacy to it, the sense of life about it, a sense of ancientness about it, all rolled into one.
Well, yeah, mist does a lot of that, doesn't it? Because one of the extraordinary things that about the wilderness is the contrast between this incredible ruggedness and incredible gentleness at the same time in the same place. And here it is. This whisper of mist. And you can feel the silence just looking at this incredible stillness, and yet and just down the pipe there's some major storm going to come in and turn everything chaotic again.
It can be quite a juxtaposition too, having the really beautiful soft mist, and then you've got these really gnarled sort of rocks and serrated ridges, and it's just a nice, beautiful combo, and then that golden light or soft light coming in. Yeah, it's magic.
And this is the last
definition shot of an unrepeatable image.
yeah, that's right. This shot is, I mean, it's interesting to me for a number of reasons. And in a way, it's really kind of grown on me. Some of you would have read that account I did with Grant and his friend Ian when we had to get rescued. A little, not too much.
No, you did very, very well not to get rescued majorly. So
much earlier, yeah.
Quite a serious thing that you faced, but well done.
Yeah, it was a bit of an epic, and this was a very remote place way out on the west coast, and it was blowing a gale, absolute blowing a gale. It was impossible. The tripod was useless because it would have been blown away, and it was not possible to hold the camera steady. So I was lying down with my elbows jammed on a rock, trying to hold the camera still and hoping that the in-camera stabilization would do the rest. And there was sunbeams. I thought, some sunbeams. But I guess part of my brain was picking up this little hillock here. But this was the only really good shot I got on the whole trip. And it makes, as far as I'm concerned, it makes the whole trip worthwhile. But I guess in a way, it says a lot about what I'm trying to do in wilderness and how I see wilderness. Partly because that hill has got no name. It's nothing. It's nowhere. It's in the sense of emptiness and anonymity about it. And to me, like I was saying before about naming, this sense of anonymity, which has something that hasn't been touched even by a name. It hasn't been put in the box of our particular system of thinking, our particular list of priorities, what's important to human beings. None of that. It's what it is. It's simple, pure, untouched earth doing its thing.
I'm interested, Martin. I've always liked to get into the tech gear. Do you have like a favorite sort of focal length set of ranges of lenses that you now that you're digital that you take out with you?
I only take two lenses at the moment, but it covers pretty much the range I need to, the 12 to 24. 12 because it's incredibly wide. I mean, unthinkably wide, but in terms of how what the technology was a few years ago.
Man after Lukey's heart.
Yeah, that's my favorite lens. It's pretty much attached to my camera at all times.
And a 24 to 105. And I mean, I would love to carry something, like 200, 300. But the weight puts me off. And I figure that with a 42 meg camera, if I do need to take a tele shot, I can crop, And also generally, if I'm using tele, I'm usually using it, shooting something distant, so there's atmospheric haze. So the loss of resolution in terms of cropping will not be a big deal because there'll be some loss of resolution due to atmospheric haze. That's my thinking. And so far, there's been very few times when I've thought, I really do need a higher tele lens.
What system are you, Martin? Like what
Olympus.
brand? Are you like Canon or Nikon?
Olympus, isn't it?
Olympus.
Sony now.
Sony.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Sony now. Okay.
Yeah, like I used to love the Olympus, but I got sick of them. You know, the OMD is a great camera, but it did the 4/3 size, you know, which is only a quarter of the size of the Sony full frame, quarter of a full frame. You know, it did bug me that it didn't pick up the kind of resolution I wanted on things like foliage. I mean, like a lot of the shots I've shown you were taken on the 4/3 one. You know, so like that first shot of St. Columba Falls, that was micro 4/3. Nothing much wrong with that. You know, but it was just particularly in terms of the detail of foliage. You know, it always fell short. But I kept hanging on with the IMD because I thought sooner or later they're going to upgrade the sensor. And they kept upgrading the camera, but they never upgraded the sensor. And then they brought out this stupid thing called the OMX thing, which is like the size of a brick, you know, ridiculously big, heavy camera, which completely defeated the whole purpose of the micro 4/3 system. And that was the death knell of Olympus, because they've gone down the tube since then. I mean, they've actually sold their whole camera division to some firm that'll break it up and sell it for scrap, basically. So that's the end of Olympus. And, you know, it's almost like they signed their own death warrant. And fortunately, by then I'd already switched to Sony, because I did feel that the time was come to go back to full frame, because the beauty, I mean, the full frame, even in the Olympus was giving me a higher resolution than I used to get on film. And with the Sony now is, I mean, I love it. Basically, I mean, I'm incredibly happy with the Sony camera, and the lenses are superb.
So Martin, were you influencing Grant, or was Grant influencing you?
Grant got there before me. Yeah, Grant got there before me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Several other people. I mean, the only thing that I'd been Sony used, the earlier versions of Sony had a bad reputation for battery life and a few other things, and people used to complain about the menus. Battery life is brilliant now, or much better anyway. And the only thing that possibly a bit faulty about the A7R III is that it probably hasn't got the same waterproofing qualities as some of the other cameras. You know, it's come up pretty poorly in that, like sometimes it leaks in the bottom. So you have to be a bit careful. I mean, obviously that is very much an issue in the Tasmanian wilderness, to say the least. And the one thing that does bug me, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, is, you get up some morning, it's perfect, you go down to the waterfall, you get out your camera gear, and you got bloody fogging inside the lens. What do you do? And you can't do anything, as you know, you can't take the lens apart, so you have to wait for the sun to come up, which might take weeks. Keep
some silica gel maybe in the pouch.
Well, I guess because the only way that's going to work is that if you've got an airtight pouch. But yeah, I think I'll have to start looking seriously at that. I mean, I went through phases of carrying a Pelican case.
Oh, wow.
In the film days, yeah. I mean, a bloody great Pelican case, you know, like a suitcase. And
you strap that to the barrel that you're carrying around.
Well, I used to have a custom-made pack, you know, like 150 litres of 100.
Oh, my God.
Never go the 3-person tent and the Pelican case, and, you know,
kitchen sink.
Who are you?
Holy smokes.
150.
Well, you know,
What are your knees made of?
Sony users are used to making compromises and stuff, so
yeah, no, listen, I'm sure that a lot of these images look very compromised, Nick, don't they? They look fantastic to me, but anyway.
Well, just on that point, you know, I mean, I think part of the burden one carries as an artist is that you're never really entirely satisfied. But it's good. I mean, you never really get quite what you want, and if you do, it's only in retrospect. You think, yeah, it's probably okay. But that's what drives you. You know, that keeps you continually looking to express what is ultimately probably not expressible. You may be a bit close.
I think there's an aspect of perfectionism there too, where you want things to be exactly the way you want, but nature's never really exactly what you want, is it? So
I actually called. I had an exhibition some years ago. I collaborated with a haiku poet called Ron Moss, and I called that exhibition Imperfections, just to kind of make that point. And it was partly a kind of in-joke about the fact that, you know, to hell with it. I mean, I'll just have to live with the fact my photographs aren't perfect, but also that nature is perfectly imperfect, or vice versa. You know, that's the beauty of it. It doesn't conform to the narrow idea of perfection. Its perfection is vastly more chaotic than that. You know,
Yeah, I was having a conversation with Nick and Paul around that too, and with some imagery you see nowadays where it almost is too perfect, and it just doesn't look right. It almost looks, it's too, it doesn't have that realism to it anymore because it's been edited to perfection, I suppose. So
that's true, and that's also part of the reason why I was less attracted to large format as well, because large format tends to focus more on perfect compositions and perfect detail, whereas with a smaller format, like a Lagos Ducantis' work, there's a kind of raw edge to it. There's more freedom to be rough, but the bush is rough. You can kind of get that balance of roughness and the sublime in the same picture. You're pretty close to what you're trying to do.
Magic.
Well, I hate to be a party pooper, but I think we need to wrap this up, fellas.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Could
did
keep
not want to
going
stop.
on all night. Absolutely. Did you have a shot you want to finish on, Martin, or leave it with that one?
This is it. So we know.
No, that's brilliant.
Perfect.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant image to finish on. Nice sunset, I suppose, on the episode. So yeah, look, thanks so much for joining us, Martin. It's been absolutely enthralling, and
Such a privilege,
real
Martin.
honor to have you with us.
Well, it's a privilege to be with you guys. I mean, huge respect for your work. So yeah, it's been great, and it's been really nice to shoot the breeze about something we're all so passionate about.
Yes, absolutely, and keep up the good work. It's really inspiring to see you and Grant and Chris, really, on the international stage with wilderness. So it's a huge contribution to the world. So
It sure is.
all right, and Paul's checked out already too, I see.
Batteries.
The battery's died.
We'll leave it there. Thanks.
There you go. That's how long the show's been.
We can still hear you. That's unlucky. But anyway.
All right. So no, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks again, Martin. We'll be back again next week. Until then, have a great week, and happy shooting. See you later.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, and don't
Thanks
forget to
again,
like
Martin.
and subscribe, please.
Cheers, actually, Nick.
Oh yeah, don't